This is McLeod Insights, where we feature conversations with longtime transportation industry veterans who are now team members at McLeod Software. Our goal is to support and empower our customers by helping them learn about proven ideas and best practices that will have a positive impact on how they run their companies. Let's dive in.
Hello everyone, my name is Barry Brookins. I'm the Director of Data Science here at McLeod Software.
And my name is Chris Wilson. I'm Product Owner for Business Analytics here at McLeod. And we're going to talk today about how to spot opportunity using the data that you have so that you can discover new things to do with and for your trucking company.
Chris has a great Lou Holtz quote. He says, "You're never as good as everyone tells you when you win, and you're never as bad as they say when you lose." And when you look at that perception and reality, and you look at trends and ups and downs, and we tend to think everything's either all bad or all good. And reality is there's a little bit of both at all times, and you can find what you're looking for.
That's absolutely true. And people do, right? If they have a negative stint on life or look at life, everything just seems to be against them. When in reality, there are things that are happening positive to them and they just don't see it. And that introduces a concept that we're going to talk about today, and that is that reality is often tangential to the sentiment in the market most of the time. And so if the sentiment in the market is measured in headlines, Barry, reality probably isn't exactly what those headlines are saying it is. Fair?
Fair.
And that then opens up the opportunity for us to suggest a method of viewing the world, a new lens, if you will. And we'll get into the premise that extraordinary thinking leads to extraordinary action that creates extraordinary results. And it's a mind shift. It's a way of changing your frame of reference in a manner that allows you to do something that you otherwise wouldn't have done. But there is a warning to this presentation, right? We're going to talk about embracing the suck. And if you're military or any form of first responder, you understand this statement firsthand. But for those of us that are not, opportunity is often dressed in overalls and looks like work. Thomas Edison said that, and that's often why people miss opportunity, because they're not looking to do extra work, when in reality, opportunity requires a little extra thinking, a different way of thinking, and a little extra effort. But for it, you're generously rewarded most times. There's also this premise or axiom that in the midst of every problem, opportunity exists. So if you're feeling troubled, if you're turbulent about something, that is a warning sign that opportunity is close by, but you got to be looking for it, right? You can't be all self-involved in that turbulence. You have to be focused beyond that turbulence, looking for where that opportunity lies. And that brings us to the next notion, which is action absorbs anxiety, right? So if you're anxious, right, you're turbulent about something, you're probably, that's your mind telling you that you should be in action about something. And so once you get into action, that anxiety will dissipate. Fear is to be expected when it comes to opportunity. And the last point we want to make sure you understand is, as you sit here watching us, you're 20 times more capable than you think you are. And I grabbed that from a book called The Way of the SEAL. And the Navy SEALs, they practice this. They test themselves to the point of near death, definitely high fear circumstances. And their thinking is that they're 20 times better than they think they are. And we know they're among the best of us. So you can think about that and let that absorb into you, that you too are 20 times, we're all 20 times stronger, smarter, better than we think we are. We're our own worst critics, and we have to get past that. We can't let that paralyze us.
And Chris and I have both we've been on that floor, right? And it's you're going through the day and you're trying to get a load for every truck and a truck for every load, and you just can't see past that. And I think that's what we want to talk about is breathe. Look for those opportunities as you're swimming up to the surface to try to get your head back above water. Look for those things that can make it better. And like I said, we know, right? It's you just want to get through the end of the day, call it a day. You've probably already been there way longer than you wanted to be, but take a little time, find a way to look for those things that can make life a little easier, a little more profit, a little more better. Evaluate your situation.
Absolutely. And we're going to show you how to do that using Impact Pro. We're not just giving you coaching advice and then leaving you high and dry, right? We're actually going to show you what we mean. We're going to go through a scenario and we're going to compare headlines and this is a real scenario, a real news story. It's less than a few weeks old. And we're going to look for the untold story, right? There is a notion I want to plant with you today. If you remember one thing in this presentation, remember this. Clickbait often ignores opportunity. What is clickbait? Clickbait is any news story that has a headline that is intended to generate an action on your part. And typically, fear-based reactions, anxiety-based reactions are powerful. You're not logical when you're in a state of anxiety or in a state of fear. And so news headlines can often be biased towards those fear-based responses because they need your eyes to justify their advertising revenue, which is ultimately where the news makes its money, right? It's the number of eyeballs that look at their headlines. And so we're going to take an actual example and show you just how to find opportunity there. Want to jump in?
Yeah, so I think, Chris, what we've got here is dry vans, looking at the typical case, dry van carriers out of Southern California. We've seen ports on both coasts, drop-offs in November, changes in the shift. We talked in an earlier episode about how things are going away from some of the West Coast ports to the East Coast ports. But there's opportunity in this, and so let's look and use our tools and see where we can find it.
Fair enough. We mentioned this in the opening. We're going to restate it, but we're going to use a graphic because it's worth 1,000 words. Market sentiment headlines. Those are the tangent lines, the arrows, if you will. And then reality, that's represented by that solid curve that's going up and down. Our markets are in a constant state of expansion and contraction. Now, what is said about those markets is often greater than or worse than what is real about those markets. And so fortunately for you, you have Impact Pro and you can look at any trucking market in the country and make a determination for yourself what is real and what is not. So we think about things, and if we're in status quo, we're deploying ordinary thinking. We're not challenging the circumstances around us. And as a result, if we're in status quo thinking, the market is fantastic, profits have never been better, we're not looking for that new opportunity. Because there's opportunity when things are good, there's opportunity when things are bad. And rarely is the headlines that we read equal to what reality is. It happens, but it's a momentary point in time where our thinking actually, from the standpoint of the news, reflects actual reality. All the other times there's a tangent between the two. So if I'm thinking ordinarily, I'm taking ordinary action and I'm getting ordinary results. The premise that I want to introduce today is when I look through a different lens, when I begin thinking in an extraordinary manner, then I am opening myself to the possibility that I can take extraordinary results. It doesn't mean you're going to work harder. It just means you're going to work different. You're looking at something in a current time state that not everybody else is maybe noticing. And as a result, once you start looking at that and you start seeing the possibilities that exist for you, you start converting your business to take advantage of those possibilities, and you end up with extraordinary results. Initially, you're in a lower momentum state. Eventually, because of execution and discipline, you'll get to a higher momentum state. And so this is something I learned about 10 years ago. I want to share it with you guys because it absolutely is a reflection of our department, isn't it, Barry?
Sure.
I mean, just 2 years ago, we didn't have Impact. We didn't have Impact Pro. We didn't have the APIs. It was just words on paper, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Just what could we do, right? Instead of what have we got? What could we do? And that's what got us there.
And if we had to know how before we got into action in the creation, right? It'd been pretty fearful because we just didn't know how.
Right.
We had no clue.
Just focusing on that, the how to do it instead of why or what we were doing.
Yeah. We knew it was the right place to go. We just didn't know how we were going to get there. So let's take a scenario. Let's suppose that we're a dry van carrier based in Southern California, and that the port business represents a lot of our demand for our services, that we service the port and the customers of the port. So all the news articles that we're reading about the ports in general say things like a drop off in volume, demand out at all-time low, the parade of uglies, right? Especially on the West Coast, especially in Los Angeles, in the Inland Empire, right? Probably the decline in demand has been most pronounced, most visible. We came from an environment where we had 136 ships loitering off the coast of California waiting on a berth to now no ships loitering off the coast of California. And the backlog in activity at the port has since been processed. And so now the port's like, what do we do now? We could do more than we are currently doing. And yet there is a decline in demand, and there's a number of reasons for that. It's been stated by many news organizations that there are different trade patterns evolving. Supply chains are transitioning, right? And so there's also this concept that the East Coast ports are much busier, right, than the West Coast ports are, and they are. And we've proven that in our analysis and in our indicators. As we're reading this news story, right, we note that LA is handling 7% less, and that Long Beach is down 0.5 percentage point, right? That's not a positive outcome for our business as a dry van carrier domiciled in Southern California. And then we get to the money in this article, which is that trade routes are shifting, as well as manufacturing migrates from mainland China to other locations. Well, that's not good, because if those other locations aren't Southern California, we've got to find something to do with our trucks. Very easy to become anxious as we're reading through this story, and yet the opportunity is right in front of us. And it says, the trade routes are shifting, as well as manufacturing migrates from mainland China to other locations. South and Southeast Asia, which means that's going to be container volume coming into the West Coast when it recovers. Also, locations like Mexico, and some onshoring that impacts important trade routes. You can make the East Coast and the Gulf Coast more attractive for shippers. Barry, if I'm a dry van carrier in Southern California and I'm concerned that I may not be able to remain viable as a dry van shipper in Southern California, if I'm thinking in an extraordinary state, Laredo's, that's our backyard really, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that, geographically it's different, but it's not that far. It's not like moving your operation from, say, LA to Savannah.
Right.
Or New York, New Jersey, or any of the other East Coast ports that are really booming, right?
Right, and this really applies, same scenario. You could be in the upper Midwest and you lose a major shipper or things change. You could have the same kind of things when you're adapting, but that's this particular scenario is one that is real.
Yes.
And that we've seen happen. And so instead of maybe, hey, we got to close up shop and go all the way across country, to your point, there's an adjacent market that's got some freight there that we just got to figure out how to get there.
Yeah, or maybe a different equipment type. Maybe dry van demand is down where you're at. You might ponder, what is refrigerated demand doing? What is flatbed demand doing? Yep. It's less expensive to just switch trailer types than it is to create a new domicile in a geographic region that you're not familiar with.
Yeah, or or even worse, just reduce your drivers and capacity that you've got. You work hard to get that, and you work hard to keep it. Let's figure out how we can use it for when things do shift around, or maybe they don't have to shift back around.
Right. So let's take the premise that we are looking for a new market, Barry, that we're concerned that the West Coast port recovery, even when it recovers, isn't going to be enough to keep us busy. So now what? Or maybe isn't going to be enough to keep us viable. So now what? Well, when you're using Impact Pro, you have access to the annual market cycle screen, and that appears in the trends, and it's the very first choice that you have. And what the annual market cycle allows you to do is to measure what's going on in a market and how much money is being spent in a market, shippers to the carriers. And it allows us to analyze a couple of different trends. Let's take rates first, because typically that's what people lead with, right? So we've read all the news articles. Rates aren't what they used to be in 2021. Well, when you look at Laredo, that's not exactly true. Rates were as good in 2022 as they had ever been. And up until December, there was no month where the rate for trucks outbound of Laredo, dry vans, were worse than in 2021. Wow. So that's atypical relative to whatever you were reading in the news about trucking rates and how they're tanking and there's just too much capacity and trucking companies are going out of business. Not the guys in Laredo. They're very busy right now. And so we can see these are average rates all in and still $3,000 a truck in the month of December. And actually, if I shift that into a weekly view, it was actually better than that towards the end of the year. So those are the rates. What's the difference right now between the spot and the contract market, right? We've heard all this story and news items about how the spot market rates are tanking and they're driving the contract rates to miserable levels.
Right, and that's spot versus contract. That's just a tangible example of supply versus demand, right? That's where it ends up. If I have more trucks than I have more orders, the rates go down, or the contract rates seem to take precedence, and vice versa. Not enough trucks and way too many orders, those spot rates go up as the contract stuff gets covered on there.
So if average rates have been declining all across the country, and they have, right, that implies that the spot rates in the market are cheaper than those that are contracted for contracted trucks.
You would think.
And that's dragging it down. But when you look at Laredo, and we look at it on a monthly basis, an average monthly basis, we see that spot market trucks in Laredo are actually $484 in December, more expensive than the contract trucks available. That implies that there are room for rate increases, not decreases. Yep. So here in Laredo, we're seeing a market that's bucking the general trend for whatever reason. It's not a reflection of what the headlines are saying. And as a result, there's potential opportunity for us to, if we can think about how to land our trucks in Laredo, for us to participate in some of this action. And so that's a good thing to note. If you're going into a market where the spot rates are more competitive than the contract trucks, you're going to make less on your truck. Mm-hmm. When you go into a market where the spot rates are more expensive, especially when you're trying to penetrate that market for the first time, it's a good thing it's a good thing. It buys you a little extra wiggle room until you can get contract rates from the shippers in those areas.
Yeah, and you may say, hey, I don't know any shippers in these areas. We found a gem. I don't even know where to start. Well, start with your shippers, right?
Yeah.
If they've got stuff going out, they've probably got stuff coming in.
Who can get you there, right?
Yeah, and then when we were at Conway, where I was at Conway, it was always, that concept of sell the inbound, right? If they've got control over the freight, have them route it, to you or to a place, maybe they've got some influence, maybe it's another office or another plant down in some of those areas that, your contacts that you've built relationships with, they can expand that either by, choosing to choose you, hopefully to route that freight into them, or contacting their counterparts at some of the other places. So you don't necessarily have to even have a foothold in there. Start with what you got already.
So the next thing is activity, right? So if we're looking at a new destination and we're trying to figure out, how much opportunity is there really, then what we want to start analyzing is what kind of order volumes are. Now, this is not a reflection of all the orders in this lane. This is a reflection of those orders that are documented through the use of McLeod Transportation Management. But you can see the trends, and the trends are that the volume in Laredo is greater than it was in 2021. And we can see on the chart here, 6,575 shipments in the month of December. That's nothing to bark at. I mean, there's some real business there, and it was better than it was last year or even in 2019. So here's a market that's showing long-term sustained growth.
Yeah, and if you're a broker, you should be looking at these things too, right? Because you want to find out where to get your carriers to build that better relationship. Figure out where they want to go back to, but look for these hot spots, direct them into there. You can get a higher paying load with a higher paying margin. You can pay them more, and you can start to get maybe that 2-for-1. Hey, Chris, when I get you here, I've got a load there. So work them towards these highlights and these hot spots to keep them going and build that network. That triangulation doesn't necessarily have to go right back to where they've at, but get them from one good spot to another and start to look at that in that bigger picture when you're stepping back.
And if you want to know, how many of those are asset-based loads, well, you could set that filter and there you go. It looks like the asset-based loads are down in the month of December, and that's not a surprise because drivers want time off, and you don't want to lose your drivers, so you're going to give it to them. But if you flip over here to brokers, you can see what's happening with the brokers, and lo and behold, the brokers were there to pick up that drop-off in asset-based volume. Now, it's still a safe bet that if you're a contract carrier, i.e., contract carriers tend to be asset-based carriers, but not always. Brokers enter into contract rates as well. Sure. If you own the truck, the shipper's going to be real interested in talking to you. But you may not be able to penetrate a market without, because you don't have a shipper relationship there yet. Use the brokers to get there. Obviously, they got the business, and you can see it right in front of you. There's plenty of business to go around, and chances are those brokers are going to be willing to pay you, especially if you're a good asset-based carrier, a desirable carrier, somebody who's consistent, who does what they say they're going to do. They're going to want to pay you. They need that truck in their portfolio.
Yeah, and I think that's one lesson we've learned too that we could pass on to the brokers is it's go beyond margin as your value to the carrier. When you're doing those carrier scorecards or you're looking at what's a good carrier, it's not just how much money you can make off of them. It's taking all those intangibles. Look at, did they let you down? Were they there when you needed them? Did they communicate? Are they safe? Are they a good carrier? So, sometimes it's worth paying them a little bit more because you're going to get a whole lot more in return.
Especially if you're hauling automotive.
Yeah.
I mean, I know for a fact that the reason that the rates are so strong is because automotive is strong right now coming out of Laredo. It was in November, it was in October, it will be in January. The automotive guys are trying to make up for a absence of manufacturing over the last 2 years, the COVID years, right?
Yeah, and do you really want to risk losing your relationship with one of those if you're a broker because you wanted to get a few bucks cheaper on a carrier that may not have been as good on there?
Yeah, I worked for a time for the Ford powertrain division, right, and at their engine plant in Lima, Ohio, and it was $250,000 every 15 minutes we shut a plant down.
Yeah.
So you're not shopping bottom of the barrel carriers when you've got to keep that plant running, and final assembly can't have 3 days worth of engines on hand because they just physically don't have the floor space for it. Right. So when you're doing things like automotive, they pay good rates, but they pay for service. And if you can't deliver the service, there's no sense in expanding your footprint to include it. So finally, ultimately, right, it's all fine and good about what you're getting paid, how much volume, what the spot and contract is. But at the end of the day, it's all about how much money you're making. And we can see that right now we're only able to measure the broker's margins. We're working on an asset costing model for the asset folks as well. But we know that the brokers are making pretty good money right now. They averaged like $477 in December on average. That was their net profit spread.
Per load.
Yeah, per load. And it was as high as 600. So 2 to 3 times higher than at any point on average in 2019 when you compare those numbers. So there's cash. There's cash available. It's unfortunately it's not the whole market, but you don't have to master the whole market. Most trucking companies can't serve the whole market. They are where they are. And so geography is important, especially in times when the market is in a state of contraction. Look for those geographies that are bucking the trend. They're out there. They exist.
Yeah, yeah. And in some cases, they needed those extraordinary profits to offset some of the places that maybe they couldn't get out of.
Yeah.
Fast enough. They couldn't make the shift and all, but. I think our brokerage customers have definitely learned how to look for those opportunities and be not afraid to go somewhere, out of their comfort zone or somewhere new, but at the same time, keeping in mind of that core, right? That core network of doing what we do best on there.
So we've gone through a scenario very quickly, and there are companies, if you're interested in more of this type of executive coaching, there are companies out there that will help you discover these opportunities and help coach you into thinking like this, as a matter of fact. But I just want to cover what we've talked about in this scenario. We began by thinking, reading that headline, and then we were in a state of basically status quo, maybe a little state of heightened anxiety. If we're in the scenario as a West Coast dry van carrier and we're watching capacity dry up, status quo would have us in a state of fear. And certainly that's what the headlines are serving up. They want your attention. They want you to read what they have to say about it so that they can sell advertising. And that's our reality, and that's true of all media companies. But when you actually start to interrogate the story, right, you don't have to go into the state of chaos with the rest of the folks. You can actually look for those news nuggets, and you could start to analyze using tools like Impact Pro new markets, right? So if the trade patterns are changing, if the West Coast is becoming less important relative to things like, say, automotive, if Mexico is becoming more important, you can bet it's crossing through Laredo. And so you can go to Impact Pro, you can look at Laredo, just like we did. You can look at the average rates. You can look at the spot contract spreads. You can look at the volume. You can look at the average profit margins that the brokers are making. And you can determine very quickly whether or not that's worth your while, whether you want to take further action, maybe expand your geographic footprint.
Yeah, for sure. And, like Chris said, take that time, make that reality into your perception. Do it the other way. You don't make those emotional based decisions. Take the facts. You've got a great source of data there, and you can get and rise above, and don't just worry about getting to the surface, but maybe even find a new place to swim.
We thank you for your participation today in our video. We thank you for your business.